We had him on when his brilliant Belichick book was published. Now we had to get Ian O'Connor on after he sat down with easily my least favorite New York sports figure of all time, and James Dolan. That's the only way I could set up Ian O'Connor of ESPN. How are you, Ian?
How are you, Rich?
I give voice to everybody that you wrote about in this feature hating James Dolan. So tell me, how dare you humanize him, Ian, in this piece? How dare you do that?
Well, I don't know if I did. I tried not to help Jim Dolan. I tried not to hurt him. I just wanted to reveal him. And I'm not sure that the Knicks fans who despised him before it felt any differently afterward. I imagine you didn't.
No, I did. I did, actually. His comments on battling his alcoholism were something that definitely resonated with me. Obviously, I did not know about his charitable contributions in the area. I assumed he was charitable. I assumed that the Knicks are obviously part of the New York fabric for as long as they are, that they would do that. The thing that I took away from his very noble and worthy comments about his own alcoholism and how he wouldn't blame it on his family life or anybody else, it just seems that he never accepts responsibility for anything that he's done to run the Knicks into the ground, though, Ian.
Yeah, that's right. That, and also on 3 different occasions, he's accused other people of being alcoholics, which is a strange thing for a recovering alcoholic to do. And I actually did point that out to him. And
what did he say?
You're right, Rich.
What did he say to that?
He didn't have much of a response to that, because I said, listen, if a fan yells out at you, which happened, hey, sell the team, and he was walking to his car. He stopped and he pivoted and he got in the guy's face. The guy and he berated the fan for yelling that out. And I said, you know what? As a New Yorker, I grew up in and around New York City. Yeah. I can understand that. But why did you need to call the guy or accuse the guy of being an alcoholic? And so he said, well, he had a beer in his hand, but now he's done it on 3 different occasions, and I just think it's not necessary. But he didn't have much of a response to that. And so as far as his decisions running the Knicks, he's not really running them anymore. That's one thing I took away from the conversation is, unlike, say, 10, 12 years ago, he really spends so little time on the Knicks. Now he's so consumed by his entertainment properties that he hires a basketball executive. He occasionally checks in with that person, now Steve Mills and Scott Perry. He provides the resources, and he goes to the games, and that's it. Otherwise, he's worried about building these entertainment venues in Vegas and London and hopefully some other cities. And that's where I think he sees his legacy being established over the next 10 years. I think he's really retreating from the whole public part of owning an NBA team. And I thought that was actually an important part of our conversation.
So do you really think he is what I know you asked him about selling the Knicks. Do you think he really is thinking about it, Ian? I mean, because I'm sure that there's enough people that could scrape together $5 billion if that's what he wants, although I think the price of the team took a hit when you lose by 18 to the Suns after your feature airs and is published. Do you think he's really serious about it?
The stock price actually went up, according to CNBC, and then a story they published in the hours after my piece hit on ESPN yesterday morning. And people thought, hey, there's a possibility Dolan's going to sell. Stock went up. And so it was kind of a funny article to read. But I do think it's a feasible scenario. I don't think he's looking to sell, but he did tell me he can never not consider selling because he answers to his shareholders. I do believe when you look at Rich 2.5 years ago, he sold Cablevision for nearly $18 billion. He's not afraid of doing a major transaction. That was a much bigger sale than a proposed sale of the Knicks for $5 billion. I think if somebody presented an offer over the next 3, 4, 5 years in that range, or worth $1.5 billion more than the valuation of the franchise, according to Forbes, I think he would definitely consider it. No question about it, because he doesn't like the public part of being an owner of the Knicks. Even he told me after they won their first game of the season, some fans actually called out some positive things to him on his way out of the building. He didn't like that either. He doesn't like the fact that when he goes out to dinner, he needs a security guard. He doesn't like the fact that when he's out shopping, people yell negative things at him. Sometimes he told me he books musical gigs with his band in Europe just to get away so nobody can recognize him. That, to me, does not sound like a guy who's eternally committed to owning the New York Knicks. So I would not be surprised over time if that happens. And I think there are a lot of New York Knicks fans who probably hope that does indeed happen. And I guess we'll see how it plays out.
Ian O'Connor interviewed James Dolan for ESPN and ESPN.com here on the Rich Eisen Show. And him calling somebody who heckles him in the streets a drunk The thing that really upset me about that is because it is a complete lack of customer service. It's a complete disdain for it. It is a complete disdain for any sort of contact with a fan base because he understands that he has the crown jewel in many ways of a sports franchise, and folks are going to come regardless. And the number of celebrities that I interview, Ian, who would have a problem with him and would voice it if they weren't afraid of some form of retribution to their season tickets or their front row seat, I've lost track of it. So that's part of what does he say about that when you have that conversation with him about his relationship with the fans?
Yeah, he tells me, and he's told many people this, that he really cares deeply about the fans and trying to win for them. Of course, his behavior in those instances would go cut against the grain of that thought and that sentiment. And I do think this, they've been bad for such a long time. They've won one playoff series since Jeff Van Gundy walked out of the building and quit 17 plus years ago. If the Knicks were a consistent contender, like basically his Rangers have been for the most part, I think the way people look at him and his feisty, combative nature would be different. But the fact of the matter is, he's been a consistent loser in the NBA, and therefore his behavior is a big part of the narrative of why he might be considered by most New Yorkers the worst owner in a post-Donald Sterling NBA. And so his response is, I care deeply about the fans. His friends and associates say there's nobody. I talked to everyone from Wayne Gretzky to Messier to the people who work for him now at the top levels of the Rangers and the Knicks. They all say that nobody cares more about trying to win for the fans than this guy, and his resources that he provides proves that. Well, it's got to be beyond the resources, and it is the way you comport yourself. And in that context, he has been a failure without question. And so I don't think he has good answers to those questions. I think, as Messier told me a while back on the phone, the only thing that's going to change it for Jim is winning. If you don't win, nothing else is going to matter. And, of course, they've not found the right formula, or at least on the basketball side, the right executive to make that happen.
Well,
and, I don't see.
If you don't mind me just jumping in here, Ian, I mean, just like I have to – I can't believe I'm going to say this. I have to beg to differ with Mark Messier because I'm sitting out here. My kids are wearing Celtics gear because my wife's a big Boston fan. I never thought my children would ever wear that stuff. I'm from Staten Island, ever. Thought that would be in a million years. And I don't want to set foot in Madison Square Garden again, even if they do have 50, 60 win seasons because of what happened with Charles Oakley. And your conversation with him, your quote from him in this piece, Ian O'Connor here on the Rich Eisen Show, says it's quote, he was out of control. He's talking about Charles Oakley when he was dragged out of the Garden by Dolan's security at the Garden on February 8th, 2017. He was out of control. Anybody else who went even half the way that he went would have been ejected from the venue. It just got too bad. He had to be taken out, which to me was the most outrageous part of the piece, because the fact that folks went up to him to begin with is because Dolan made him, Oakley, persona non grata at the Garden and not allowed to be in there. Has he taken any responsibility at all in your conversation for it? That's an outrage, Ian. That's an outrage.
I think the bigger outrage, at least the way I look at it, is not taking accountability for the Anuka Brown-Sanders case back in the verdict was rendered back in 2007. And I think, yes, I agree with you on the Oakley front. And I said, wasn't there any way? Here's a beloved Knick in your building, okay? You've got an issue with him. How about saying, hey, Charles, come sit next to me for the second half. Afterward, we're going to go back to my office. Yeah. You and I are going to talk man to man. We're going to settle our differences, and you're going to be a part of this organization again. And just do me a favor. Let's cool down. Let's watch the rest of the game, and then we'll be in my office for as long as we need to be after this game. He couldn't do that because Oakley was too out of control. I've talked to a lot of people who actually are not enemies of Dolan, who know him very well, who say that should have happened. So many people in the building say there was no way that could have happened, that Oakley was just too belligerent in that moment.
But even to walk up and just – sorry, go ahead.
The bigger case was really Brown-Sanders, because if that case unfolded today, imagine I just think it would have been covered and looked at entirely differently, because back then it was just kind of part of the Garden culture of dysfunction. Today, with the and rightfully so, the Me Too movement, I just think that would have been so much worse for Dolan, for Isaiah Thomas, for everyone in MSG if they took that to trial and lost. And I think I was looking for more contrition for what happened in that case. Instead, the answer was we were right, the jury got it wrong. And I thought that was very disappointing that so many years have passed and he has not really taken any accountability for the hostile work environment that created that case to begin with.
Yeah, the sexual harassment suit that was filed against the Garden and Isaiah Thomas and James Dolan. Look, Ian, last one for you. Why do you think he did this? I mean, this is so out of character to sit down with somebody that's not in the local media and have a conversation. Why do you think James Dolan did this?
Well, Rich, I actually have covered the Knicks over the years in the New York area quite a bit as a columnist, not as a beat writer. And I've actually written some fairly critical pieces about Dolan. And so I was a little surprised that they said yes to my request. I think he just he realized there were a lot of outstanding issues and he wanted to get his side out. And his people vet everyone. So they vetted me. I guess they thought I was fair, at least in my criticism over the years. And I was a little surprised that I was granted to sit down. I didn't know how long it would last. I walked in not knowing that. I was a little concerned I wouldn't get to. He was just going to stand up and walk out at some point, and we had a lot of ground to cover. But he did sit there for 2 hours, and it was a conversation. It wasn't an inquisition. But I pressed him on a lot of things, and I just think at some point he wanted to get his side out on this host of issues today and yesterday over time, and he did that. So I didn't. All I wanted to do was inform people about the way he thinks and why he made some of the decisions that he made, and then it was up to the reader to decide whether or not he or she still despised them, didn't despise them, whatever. I didn't want to help him. I didn't want to hurt him. Sure. I wanted to reveal him and then let the reader make the decision on his or her own.
The last one for you, Ian, your excellent book on Belichick. How do you think Bill is what do you think's happening in that home base right now in Patriots camp with 2 consecutive losses right now? What do you think?
Yeah, well, right, and probably, Rich, the Miami thing was such a fluke, so we wouldn't really probably having this conversation if that didn't happen. But it did happen, and Belichick had a big role in that by putting Gronk on the field. So I think they're probably still okay, relatively speaking. If you look at their postseason path, it's still manageable. I think Houston is going to lose to Philadelphia this Sunday. And all of a sudden, if the Patriots win out at home against the Bills and Jets, which is very likely, they're the 2 seed. And their only road game in the playoffs will be at Kansas City or perhaps at the Chargers. So I think they can still get to the Super Bowl. They're the only franchise after watching them this year that I would say that about, because I think Brady and Belichick and Gronk and Edelman, despite their struggles this year, relatively, they deserve the benefit of the doubt. And so I do think they're not dead and buried, though I would probably say that about almost any other franchise under the same set of circumstances.
Ian, thanks for the call. Belichick, the making of a greatest football coach of all time, is a perfect holiday gift right now. And thanks again. I kind of feel like I should put this conversation in for reimbursement with NFL healthcare. I feel like this has got to be covered for therapy, this conversation we just had. In some way, shape, or form. Thank you. Thanks, you bet. Thanks. That's Ian O'Connor.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.